gives us like a, oh, okay, here it goes. Okay, it's on.
Okay, welcome. I usually do videos on crazy stuff. So now I'm going to talk to a sane person to get information from him. And this is going to be about Paul Sztorc's invention, Drivechains. And I pronounced that correctly, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm still learning about Truthcoin. I'm not caught up. So I basically know nothing about Drivechains. So why don't you just start telling me what is the point? Like, what are they for?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's great. So Blockstream had this. So I originally had this prediction markets project, which I'm still working on, but progress on that outstripped. That project was supposed to be a Bitcoin sidechain, but progress on sidechains was a lot slower than progress on the prediction markets project. So my project, I know, it's software is never finished, but I got my project to kind of a pretty good state, like kind of a Bitcoin alpha 0.1 state. And then I looked around and then there was no sidechains technology. So I had to like go back and go down the stack, so to speak. And I was waiting for other people to do the sidechains technology, but they really didn't. And so I looked at the Blockstream white paper, and I'm pretty sure that almost no one has read that paper because it's a lot of people have glanced at it, I think, but it's a very dense paper. There's a lot in it, and it's hard to read. And then so I kind of read it, and I thought about it, and I thought about what it was really trying to do. And I thought you could do something very similar that was a little simpler, because it's in the sort of game theoretic sense, they're assuming there's this idea of the SPV proof, which basically, to gloss over a lot of things, just says that in the long run, you can trust the miners to be mining a chain that's in their self-interest. So that's glossing over a lot of stuff. But I thought if you're going to assume 51% of the miners are on your side, then you can do a much simpler thing than what they were doing. And so I turned my attention to that. And so what Drivechain is supposed to be is a kind of very simple incarnation of sidechains. So it's supposed to let you have all the freedom of altcoins, but you're still using the same 21 million Bitcoins. And so that's sort of the goal. There's other things, but that's basically the point. That's how the project came to be. And I published it in November 2015. And you get an ongoing review. So it's been iterating and responding to feedback. And then, of course, in the process of building it, you encounter all kinds of new questions that you have to solve. So I eventually presented it at Scaling Milan, or part of my strategy. I presented a strategy at Scaling Milan, which is that we should have one chain be very decentralized and have a very small block size and be very like locked down and very secure, and kind of you could run it over Tor and all kinds of like very, very, very secure. It's kind of like a Mott and Bailey defense, like you've got this one thing that's like the castle, and you hide in there. But then you got this other thing you got these other chains, and some of them would be maybe, like a meadow or like a really nice farmland. And you hang out there because it's nicer. But then if something bad happens, everyone just retreats to the castle until the bad stuff goes away. And then when they leave, you go back out to where you wanted to be the whole time. And so that's what I presented at Scaling Milan. And then I got a little bit more feedback about that. So I invented this other thing called blind merge mining, which is Drivechain relies on this weird kind of shaky assumption, but blind merge mining is, I think, a pretty cool piece of technology that just doesn't really rely on weird assumptions, just very, very, very safe ones. And that allows, so like Namecoin, as you probably know, it's merge mined with Bitcoin such that it can absorb hash rate from Bitcoin without, it doesn't need its own miners. It can just use Bitcoin, piggyback on Bitcoin's miners. And in fact, a very funny thing happened over the last week, which is that Namecoin was absorbing hash rate from Bitcoin Core as well as Bitcoin Cash, and it ended up having more hash rate than either of them alone. So that was a very funny thing that happened with Namecoin. But
oh wow, that is great.
It is very funny. It's one of the funniest things to have ever happened. I think, in Bitcoin, and so I hope other people got a laugh out of it. Certainly, it's also funny because the hash rate is skyrocketing constantly. So all the modern blocks have such a tremendous amount of proof of work that if that doesn't need to hold up for a very long time. I haven't exactly done the math, but Namecoin could have not only the most hash rate but also the highest cumulative difficulty, because it only takes a few modern blocks that are 20 or 30% more difficult to just kind of totally eclipse everything that was done in 2011, 2012, etc. So it could become the heaviest valid chain, which is very funny. But regular merge mining has two problems. One is that the miners have to run software. They have to run the Namecoin software to assemble a valid block before they build a Namecoin block that kind of, I'm glossing over the details, but they build a Namecoin block that kind of looks like it's inside of a Bitcoin block. And then when they mine the Bitcoin block, they can mine both. But in order to do that, they have to run the Namecoin software, and the Namecoin software is sometimes buggy and it crashes. And then if the miners lose uptime, that hits their bottom line directly, which used to happen a lot because Namecoin was just more buggy than Bitcoin. And also, it's funny, I've heard that from multiple reliable sources that if the mining equipment shuts down, there's so much power flowing everywhere that a lot of the hardware will just start to explode if it's off and it's not mining Bitcoins. So the energy gradient will just build up. So they don't want this stuff to crash. So that's why, even though mining Namecoin is free, a lot of people would you only got like 60% of the hash rate to merge mine Namecoin, because even though it was free revenue, it wasn't really free because there's this buggy software.
Okay, so let's talk about
Sure.
what you just said in terms of how drive chains are going to make it easier.
Yeah, so blind merge mining, you can merge mine the sidechain without actually running the software. So what happens is other people, the nodes over there, run the software. And I have an assumption that some of those people who are running those nodes also own regular Bitcoin, which is a very safe assumption because this model here is very asymmetric. So it's very much like a hierarchy with Bitcoin core as the root, or whatever is there's a main chain. And that one is kind of the base layer. And then there's side chains off of that. But there's there's an asymmetry. So there's like a hierarchy where the one is sort of more important, the Bitcoin core in this example. So what I assume is that someone who's running Namecoin node also owns some Bitcoin on Bitcoin core. And what I basically do is I have them they do a special transaction where they say, I'll pay the miner this amount if they merge mine this Namecoin block. And so the person assembles the Namecoin block and pays the Namecoin's sidechain Bitcoin. They pay themselves those transaction fees. And then they're all bidding competitively. Any of the nodes who are interested in doing this will bid competitively as long as there's more than two, which obviously there would be because it's a blockchain network. So if there's only one, that's kind of pointless. But as long as there's a few, they would have this competitive bidding, and then the main chain Bitcoin miners would still get the transaction fees. But they don't have to do like any of the work. So because some people complain that like you have like some kind of like YouTube sidechain or like an ESPN 4K super broadcasting sidechain that's like really, really difficult, has high bandwidth requirements or like privacy implications. And they didn't want it to be a case where only large miners could merge mine those. So the benefit of this is that the miners don't have to touch any of the software at all. They can just be passively receiving money. So the sidechain nodes can pay themselves epsilon. You see, like if there's 17 Bitcoin worth of transaction fees, they can pay themselves 17, and then they can try to bid like 6.8, 6.9 to try and get. They can try and get a little bit, but of course the bulk of it will just go to the miners anyway, and they don't have to worry about. And so that part I think is kind of cool. But yeah, the point of Drivechain is that you're playing with Bitcoin. It's no longer Namecoin. It's actual Bitcoin over on the other chain. You do whatever you want with it over there, and then you bring it back. But yeah, the second benefit of blind merge mining is that the miners get paid. They don't get paid on the side chain. They get paid immediately with the main chain Bitcoin that they know and love. So it's a lot better, I think.
Oh, yeah, that is better. I I remember once I had this conversation with Paul Snow, and I was telling him that like you shouldn't need to create a whole new investment product if you just want to you want to program new rules. And he's like, well, how are you going to pay the miners? And I was like, well, why would they want to be paid in a worse investment product anyway? They should be paid in Bitcoin. But
yeah.
So now we can do that.
Right. So that's the goal of that part.
At least that's what we will be able to do if you make this thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's we have a lot of you can go to drivechain.info and we have a GitHub and we've done a lot, but there just will need to be a lot of kind of review by other people because there's only so much that me and this other guy, Patrick, we have been working on it, but there is only, you can only bring it to a certain point yourself. And then you'll always be like blind to, you have the unknown unknowns, right? So
yeah,
other people will have to put in a little effort, I think, at this point, but it's mostly finished. And in fact, I'm considering asking Luke Dash Jr. to assign the BIP numbers because it's basically, we brought it as far as I think we could efficiently bring it we made it pretty far on both Drivechain and blind merge mining. So I think that it's going to need, it's basically, I don't want to say finished because nothing is ever finished in the world of software, but it's pretty good. There are just a bunch of issues if people want to go and help with the issues. But the design is sort of stable and the documentation is stable. So that's kind of neat.
What is the GitHub again?
I don't even remember. I think it's drivechain-project, but if you go to drivechain.info, there's a little GitHub icon in the sidebar. If you have a desktop or if you have a mobile, you have to scroll all the way to the bottom and you get the sidebar. And then you just click it. I know it is right over here. Yeah, it is called, it's github.com/drivechain-project.
Okay, so you said that there is an assumption.
Yes, there's a weird assumption. Yes. Okay, so here's the thing is if the way this works is there's only one way that it can work because the goal is to get a bunch of rules validated, but without actually validating them because you want to create a new set of software rules, have like a new blockchain, so to speak. But you don't want to have Bitcoin Core do the work. So that's kind of this paradox that you're stuck with if you want to do a sidechains like thing, right? You want to let people go into a different zone where they have new rules. So maybe it's a larger block size. It could be anything. But then when the payments come back, if there's some kind of dispute over, oh, that's not who owns that coin. Does A own it or does B own it? Then you have to have some way of resolving the dispute. So that's the paradox, is that you can't actually check who owns it, A or B, but you need to check something. And so it's kind of an unalterable, this is kind of just a paradox, but it's a trade-off like anything else. So what I do is I make it so that the sidechain has to report on exactly what it's doing at all times. And then when it wants to transfer money out of the sidechain back to the main chain, it has to do this very, very, very slowly. And the reason that this is not inconvenient is because, meanwhile, people can do these atomic swaps back and forth. So I don't think anyone would actually use this. This would be like an industrial process. And it's possible that only the miners would actually do this. But the point is when you want to send money to the sidechain from the main chain to the sidechain, it's very simple because I assume that the sidechain is watching the main chain, and I obviously assume that the main chain is working correctly. So that part is easy. So there's only one leg of the problem that is really hard, which is having the money come back. You send the money into Factum sidechain, and then you do something with it, and then you want to send the money back. Now, Bitcoin Core can't check the rules of the sidechain because this breaks the goal. The goal is to avoid doing all that. and just let other people do whatever they want and not have it affect Bitcoin Core. But at the same time, you want some guarantee somehow that this money is going to end up in the right place. And so what I do is I say all the transactions coming back from a sidechain, they're all batched up into one transaction. And then that transaction is, has an ID, it's hashed, and it's sort of frozen in place. And then everyone gets to examine it for a very long period of time. And I suggest, this is a configurable parameter, but I suggest like 1 month of it just sitting there. And then it's slowly acknowledged or non-acknowledged. It's sort of like miners like upvote it or downvote it once per block. And if it achieves enough upvotes over another length of time, which I think should be like 2 months, then the payment goes through in Bitcoin Core. And the sidechain's watching, so the sidechain knows when Bitcoin Core is sending money to it, so then it can just credit people. And it knows when the side to main withdrawal transfers, it knows when those have succeeded, so then it knows to just destroy that money, to stop locking it and just destroy it. It's because it got successfully transferred out. So basically, to put a bottom line on it, the threat is that miners can, if you have these things, let's say you have a Bitcoin Core and then you have like a large block sidechain, which is like something that people are interested in these days. So you have this sidechain that has, it doesn't matter, a 20 megabyte block size or something. And there's a total of 2,000 Bitcoins over there, or whatever the case may be. So it's like, we have about, I looked it up, but I can't remember. We have about 4.5 million or 5 million, or I think 4.5 million Bitcoins that have not been mined. And so there's 16 million on Bitcoin Core. So there would be some on these other chains. And the threat is that miners would create a transaction that pays all of the sidechains money to themselves. And then they would broadcast it. And then we would wait a month. And then they would all acknowledge it to themselves. And then the withdrawal would go through, and they would get on the main chain. They would open the sidechain account and give themselves all of the money. So that's the threat. And the only way I found to kind of defend against it is to make sure that it's very obvious in advance, and that it's very slow, and that it's very easy to check. So it'd be very easy to check the attack, because the sidechain broadcasts what it's supposed to be, what's supposed to be being withdrawn as just a little hash. And then on main chain Bitcoin, you can see what's being withdrawn, and that's a little hash, and you can just see if they match or not. And of course, they're uniform numbers, and they're only 32 bytes long or whatever. So they're very easy for a human being to see immediately that the rules are not being followed, the kind of meta rules. And it's very easy for miners to comply with the rules, because they themselves can check, because it's just a little hash. And it's also very easy for miners to kind of pull this alarm and just say, we're going to unacknowledge everything, and they can downvote everything until they figure out what's going on, and just kind of slow the process down and say, like, we don't know what's going on, but we'll figure it out later because something is up. And so that is kind of all the stuff that I threw in the way. But yeah, this is the major kind of empirical question. I think if this doesn't work, though, I think nothing will work, because I don't really see how it can get much better than this. Like, I guess you could ramp the parameters up a lot, and you could say it's got to wait for 2 months, and then it takes an entire year to be withdrawn. And you can kind of hope that that doesn't matter, because again, people can already do these atomic swaps among 2 different chains, and what you want is for people to do them at an exchange rate that's very close to 1, so that it's effectively the same token. And then you want to do this basic accounting, which is very easy to do, to make sure there's never any more than 21 Bitcoins that aren't permanently locked somewhere. So a lot of that's easy, but yeah, I think if this doesn't work, then nothing will work, which would be kind of a shame. But basically, the security model is that what would be implied if miners steal from the sidechain is that they have to do this intentionally and kind of obviously. So what it would imply is that the price of Bitcoin should go down, I think. So if the sidechain is popular and if people like it, then, they're losing all the sidechain is going to provide its own transaction fees, first of all. But second of all, it's going to provide more utility for Bitcoin. So it should be increasing the value of Bitcoin. And so destroying it should decrease the value of Bitcoin. And it should also kind of put an end to the entire sidechain experiment, because they can say, well, they're going to attack this one sidechain, so they're probably going to attack them all, which means we can't have any now and we can never have any in the future. So that's kind of the consequence, or the threat, or the kind of the equilibrium, the equilibrating force, is that the idea is that if miners were to attack a sidechain, it would take a long time. There's a lot of ways for it not working, and even if it does work, it should just harm the miners' bottom line, because investors should just say, well, I guess we're stuck with only one chain and only one development team forever, instead of having, kind of like freedom and permissionless innovation. So that is kind of the model. The other thing is, of course, I don't want to rely on this, but the other thing is people who might, like, if this is a 3-month thing, as I've been saying. So if you're like 2 months into those 3 months and it looks like the miners really are going to steal, people could just hard code. That's part of the reasons for making it so slow, is that people might just say, well, we're going to do the user activated soft fork type thing, and we're just going to say, we are not going to let this transaction in the block. And, and then, there's other things too, like if the miners really misbehave, then people, there's always the threat of the proof of work change and other things. So my personal opinion is that the miners are more docile, and other people don't have that opinion. But I think they're just normal people trying to make a living. And I think that sidechains will increase the value of Bitcoin, and then eventually it'll reach a point where mining can only stay profitable if they never attack any sidechain, with the exception of like weird side. I think it is possible to build like weird sidechains that try to harass other chains, like a chain that only pays you if you like fork a chain or something like that. And so I want miners to attack those and clean them out. In fact, I have a giant presentation on this that I called sidechain privatization, which is sort of like, I want miners to kind of like own and curate the portfolio of sidechains, just so that no one ever bothers. See, what I really don't like kind of the Ethereum idea that you can just run whatever you want and they can't stop you. Because I think that you will end up with some guy coding in secret some weird thing, and he'll code it, and then he'll put it out, and then it'll be like cat and mouse, you won't be able to stop it or something like that. So I want this thing that I call categorical control. I want the miners to be able to say, this category of smart contract we don't like, and we're getting rid of it. We're filtering it out.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of I kind of think it's silly how paranoid people can be about the miners too, because the miners are they are subject to forces that are beyond their control, which is the value of Bitcoin. And if they try to act maliciously, they harm the value of Bitcoin, and that harms the value of their equipment. So I think that there's some pretty strong constraints that will tend to keep them honest. So everything you said sounds reasonable to me.
Right. And so that's really all the bad news. The good news is that you can do now, the good news is pretty good, I think. So I think even if you're a very pessimistic person, the good news is that you can now just create whatever weird experiment you want. So you can do like an Ethereum sidechain, although I don't think it is a good idea, but you can do that. You can do a weird proof of stake. If you don't want to do the blind merge mining part, the first part, Drivechain, the hash rate escrows, you can do like whatever weird stuff you want. Proof of elapsed time. You can do all this weird Hyperledger stuff. You can do like an R3 thing. You can do like whatever weird stuff you want. You can put Bitcoin into this account that is only withdrawable if after a very, very slow time. And so you have basically totally arbitrary control over what kind of weird chain you want. You can make all the mistakes that you want with all the terrible developer talent that you want, right? And so like, what's better than that? So it totally turns the tables, I think, on the entire way that we do things in Bitcoin right now, which is that right now we have I'm not really sure what to call it. It's like a USSR Ministry of Science or something. We have it all like going through like
hegemony.
Exactly. We have like a hegemony, and
I love mistakes. This is kind of like a common theme in arguments that I have with people, is that there's just a lot of concern trolling that goes around in Bitcoin, and I always say, so just do it and see what happens.
Yeah, I think I've noticed. Haven't you noticed? I'm sure you have. There's like a very much like an anti-Hayek kind of streak running through the entire philosophy of Bitcoin right now, which is very funny, because Hayek was all about just try whatever, something will fix it somehow, the anti-fragility. But now it's very like we have to protect people from being confused. I know you did a video about that. This is like we have to
I'm just trying to cause confusion and create chaos so that they have to deal with it, because I know that the only way to deal with it is a different philosophy, the one that's more like mine, more Hayekian.
So, but I have another point about the miners, which is that I think I've noticed a kind of separation in philosophies and some of them cover different aspects of Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin's a really big, complicated thing. And I think there is like a kind of difference between like a cryptographer point of view, and then there's like a economics game theorist point of view. And there's it's basically about how much they value independence. And the cryptographers, I think, they want total independence in a strict like science statistical sense. Like they want to build a safe that cannot be opened unless you have the password, even if you have a computer the size of the sun or whatever other weird stuff, right? They want to say like, this is totally ironclad. Like there's absolutely nothing anyone can do. It's completely unbreakable, encryption, blah, 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 blah. But the other extreme is that it's sort of more of the economics thing where it's like, well, I'm going to go down the street and I'm going to buy some lunch. And I don't know what they're putting in that lunch, but I've eaten there for years and it tastes okay to me. And there's somewhere there's some process that if they do something bad with the lunch, someone else will like fix it or something. They'll get bad press, or someone will call someone and complain, or something will be in the media or something like that. And they'll just go out of business eventually and someone else will take that spot because they won't be able to afford rent. And so game theory is all about interdependence. It's all about like everyone's pointing a gun. It's like a Mexican standoff. A Mexican standoff is like game theorist approved. It's like A+, because it's like perfect. It's like perfectly balanced, And you're like, I love it. And then but the cryptographers are like, oh, what if they go crazy and shoot us? That's kind of like the miners versus developers, I think. There's the Mexican standoff, and I'm fine with it. I love it. I think it's fine.
Why don't we have a Mexican standoff sometime? Well, when we get together in February, we can have a Mexican standoff. I think
we can have them with ourselves or with other you and I with other people.
Well, I'm gonna tell Bruce Fenton about that idea because I think he'll like it.
Yeah. That would actually be funny if he organized it as like an event. You're like, okay, over here.
I think that he would like that idea.
Blockers, supporters of side chains over there, some Lightning Network supporters over there, and then we all have super soakers or something, and it's just like I don't know where that could go. It could go a lot of ways though.
That's very funny. I mean, I always think that, to me, like people will act to preserve the value of their investment, right? And
it's a little incongruent to start Bitcoin mining and then become crazy person. But well, I mean, that's kind of how I feel like what I'm doing now. Like if I thought everything was going fine, I would not have started my YouTube series. I would have just done something unrelated to Bitcoin. That's kind of what I was trying to say, is that in the thing that I sent you, and I had a lot of fun with it. I have the part where I do there's this normal like game theory grid, but I just drew like a tangled line. And I was like, the people have all these incentives to like kind of interact in horrible ways because they think they can persuade people to do this. So a lot of this stuff is crazy, like all this Twitter stuff and all this kind of like, people get harassed and, people get all kinds of threats and things. And then people feel compelled to start a YouTube series. And all this stuff is kind of this big result of not having good interactions. And it would be nicer if we just had a world where if you wanted to do something else, You just did it, and Bitcoin Core is like the Linux kernel. And I would ideally, I don't think it should change. I think Bitcoin Core should really stop changing very much. I think it's too easy to change with a hard fork or soft fork or anything. And I think we should establish a precedent where Bitcoin Core doesn't change as much. And instead, other weird things change. So all the layer 2 side chains, Lightning, all this other stuff should change a lot. Businesses that use Bitcoin. But I think we have already demonstrated that so much about Bitcoin can be changed with just a few people, just the developer vote or only the mining vote or only something. So I'm not happy about that. And I don't like all this interaction. It's not organized. So I think it would be better. This is part of the big upside. So this is why I'm very passionate about the experiment, the sidechain experiment. I think we should run it and we should see what happens. And I think it's interesting, this dichotomy I mentioned before about like cryptographer versus game theory, is that a lot of people who are great cryptographers didn't believe in Bitcoin and they didn't think it would work. And they would say things like, well, the miners will just reorganize the chain and take everyone's money. And then Greg Maxwell has that proof. He had like a mathematical proof that it wouldn't work.
I'm going to have to look that up now.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I haven't actually looked at it myself, but I think I can guess where where Satoshi kind of cheated on his proof is that I'm pretty sure that Satoshi is printing new money and giving it to people with these blocks, the 50 Bitcoins per block in the first 4 years. And the idea that those could have value, and this is something that I think you discussed with Chris also recently, the idea that those could have value and that they could be fuel for this machine, I think that's like the new game changer that he put in, that it wouldn't be possible unless people were willing to pay money for these 50 Bitcoins that were created every 10 minutes at first. And so I think in a weird way, it's funny because you think something is like a mathematical proof, but it can be, in practice, it can be overturned because governments manage the currency so badly, because people want. So it's this very weird. Bitcoin is like a big thing that it's plugged into every weird facet of the world.
Yeah. Well, wait till you see my next video.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to it.
So can you let's go into some more details about how the Drivechain is going to work. So do we have an address, a
Yes.
normal Bitcoin address, and that is the Drivechain?
Yeah, so for user experience and laziness reasons, there currently is like an address that's a little more like, normally in Bitcoin, the addresses are not like accounts, but in Drivechain they are. So it's kind of complicated to explain, but that's basically it. Right now, you can deposit Bitcoin to this. If you send it to this address, then anyone who's running the sidechain software will know, they'll hear about it, and they'll know just either from over the network protocol or just by looking at the Bitcoin blocks, because this is an asymmetric design where it's more like plugins, where I assume that everyone is running Bitcoin Core, and then you can kind of like check a little box. Do you want to also run this or that or nothing? And so they're aware of what's happening in Bitcoin Core. And so when you deposit to this little box, you get credited automatically. So it's like when you would send Bitcoin to the sidechain, and that would be one of your outputs, is that you're putting the Bitcoin into the sidechain. But then you'd have some other thing, and right now we have it as your basic kind of op return thing, and you push another address in there. And then the sidechain watches that transaction and says, oh, that person deposited 14 Bitcoin or whatever. And then here's the op return. And so we are going to credit that address over here with 14. That it will sort of print, but it's not, they're going to be destroyed when they go back. So it's just accounting. But yeah, it doesn't need to, since you have infinite flexibility with the new piece of software, that is how that works. And then once you're over there, you can do whatever you like. including opening a payment channel with people. So you can use Lightning Network within a chain, but also across multiple chains as long as they have the same hash function, which they all will. So so that's kind of neat. And also, I think it should be possible that it should be possible to charge more. Like someone should be able to send money over to sidechain, open a bunch of channels there, and then charge more for that hub per like a variable cost, charge more per transaction in that hub than maybe on main chain Bitcoin Core. And in that way, they would get kind of a return for putting the risk of putting their money in this new thing, and then people could lightning through them. If there's this is assuming that there's some weird smart contract that only the sidechain can do. That wouldn't really, I don't know if that would really work for payments, because the point of payments is that the merchant has to get, but maybe it would, because if you had like something like BitPay or something that was on the sidechain, then, so it's kind of neat. So there's a lot of flexibility. So lots of stuff to figure out. For like, actual economic agents to figure out how they are going to use it the best. But I think in practice, the first thing I would like to do is have just a sidechain that just has a larger block size, because I think people would really like that, or that people would be interested in using that, and it also would be very, very, very easy.
You know what I would like to see? I would like to see a sidechain where you have to do proof of work to make every individual transaction. Then that determines the bandwidth, not some arbitrary number. Because I think that was a design flaw that Satoshi put into Bitcoin. You should actually have to do, because that's what we do in BitMessage. You have to do proof of work to send a message into the network at all. And the whole point of proof of work is to prevent spam. So, but anyway.
Yeah, I know. I like that's funny you mentioned that, because I like the idea of BitMessage I think does. Yeah, I like BitMessage. I would definitely like to see like a kind of email sidechain. So what you're talking about kind of two different things. But you're saying like, is there a better way of doing proof of work, which is the transactions proof of work, which is kind of neat. I don't know. I think there was some like Dan Larimer tried to do something like that, but he didn't do it very well or something, and he called it transactions as proof of work or something in 2014. But aside from that, I would like to see some kind of messaging sidechain or something, and instead of doing the proof of work, you can do the real thing, like the post-converted proof of work, which is that you can charge people Bitcoin to send you money. And I know 21 does this, but they're a company, and I don't want them reading my email. So, yeah. Or even knowing who I talk to. So, and plus, their original idea was so bad, I don't know if I trust them doing anything now. I just an absurd idea of putting a miner in like everything, and like a light bulb. Like, was that real? Like, did I hallucinate that? And then they changed it to like the 21, the Bitcoin computer. And then I was like, yeah, a lot of people are having a lot of trouble. They use like these hardware metaphors. This is a very common thing in the whole like starting up a Bitcoin business. A lot of people like don't like, like Balaji, a regular computer is a Bitcoin computer. Like what are you talking about? So a lot of like weird stuff is going on. People are figuring out how software works a second time, I guess.
Well, it almost seems like most of the ideas in Bitcoin are like randomly generated.
Yeah, well, it's very Hayekian, right? They're just like, we don't know anything. We have no theory. Yeah, it's a disappointingly Hayekian. It's like it's just a slime mold, and we have no idea. Yeah. And we'll just proceed in all directions at once. And well, part of it is that this is a really interesting effect that a lot of people were misled by the blockchain without Bitcoin meme. And it got so much Emperor's New Clothes, like kind of credibility from everyone. And then I remember it was 2016. You had like Larry Summers talking about it, and then the governor of Delaware was like trying to make Delaware the blockchain state or something crazy.
Well, and also nobody understands why Bitcoin is valuable. Okay, right. So
there's no.
It's like the blind leading the blind. So you can just create all of these new blockchains and that have like almost no difference between them and Bitcoin, and they can make tons of money. And so then there's tons of incentive to just paper over,
That's what I'm saying is that
ideas.
who's like getting really like, why is it doing the slime mode thing? I think the investors are just like, institutional investors with US dollars, just like pouring money into these companies, and they think you can do anything, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're just like kind of buying options or something, and they're just like, they don't know. There's no theory. So that's a very bizarre thing that's happening.
Okay, well, do you have anything else to add? Because I think we've pretty much gone over everything I wanted to learn.
Well, I'm not sure. Well, yeah, one thing I'll add is that this proposal has a very interesting interpersonal Drivechain. Has a very interesting interpersonal effect, I think, which is that it decreases the relevance of being a Bitcoin expert. Because it's sort of like where we are now is that there's only one Bitcoin. It's only like one Bitcoin television channel, the core channel. And so if you're the producer of that channel, or if you're one of the producers, then you're a really important person. And like having access to that person, and like being their friend and giving money or whatever, that's like a big deal. But if you change it all around so that anyone can create, that you make it more like YouTube, where anyone can create their own channel and anyone can listen to whatever channel they want. So instead of being like broadcast television through the airwaves, it's more like the internet. Then it's not really important to be friends with that guy anymore, the original producer. And maybe he's like a great advisor, or maybe not, or maybe whatever. Like maybe he was good at certain things, like trying to manage all these compromises, but now it's different. And this whole thing, you have the long tail and you have these niches, and it looks different. So I think.
Oh, you said niches. For a moment, I thought you said geishas, and I was like, what is he talking about? That would be cool too, though.
Yeah, that would also be. Yeah, we can put images of that everywhere in editing. But I think it's interesting that it kind of. I'm not sure how to say, like it. I'm not. People, there's a Milton Friedman has like a big paragraph about why the free market has a bad press, and why there's like a lot of heat from intellectuals who don't like markets, because it means that they'll no longer be experts, because you're free to try every dumb idea, and so it means that they're just So I am not sure exactly what will happen as a result of that effect, but I think it is salient, and I think people should watch for it and be kind of pay some attention to it.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for joining me, and here's to more future productive discussions. Okay, I'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.